If anybody wants it, I can send this format as well. Let me just get the share screen working.
That's an awesome set of texts, I must say. Look, wow.
All right, we are in Parshat Nitzavim, and before we get into the Parsha, I think this might be our last shiur of the, well, it's definitely our last shiur of the year, because next week will be Motzei Yontif, and I don't think anyone's going to want to sit on a Zoom after 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. And then with Yom Kippur and Sukkot, I don't think we're going to be able to pick up again until after Simchas Torah. So as we look forward to that, if there's any particular approaches, we kind of do a bit of a hodgepodge in the Parsha Shiur. I'd very much enjoy it and would love to continue in the next Torah reading cycle. But if there's a different approach that might be interesting to look at, maybe focus on Chassidus or focus on a specific commentary, we can talk about that, and I'm certainly open to suggestions.
Anne was telling me that Moshe didn't like it because it wasn't directed to one point.
Yeah.
Because you would, ordinarily you field various things, various opinions and so quotes and stuff. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, Anne pointed out that she thought that's what he didn't like.
Okay, I can speak with him and see if there is something that would bring him back.
That'd be nice.
To have an opinion and then, or a statement and then have it argued, I think, or something maybe. I'm not sure about that, but that's
okay.
Yep.
I'll speak with him.
Okay.
All right, so we're in Parshat Nitzavim. Dad, you remember Parshat Nitzavim from about 28 years ago or so? 25 years ago?
25 years ago, Nitzavim. Was that a bar mitzvah parsha?
It's Aaron's bar mitzvah. It's my brother's bar mitzvah parsha. Yeah.
Okay, we can get him on the
wow.
Okay, and so we're going to look at, I think we actually looked at this pasuk last year in a very different approach to it. But there's a very famous passage, and it's for this passage that Parshat Nitzavim is always read the Shabbos right before Rosh Hashanah. So last week in Kitavo, it includes the Tochacha, which Michael Friedman read brilliantly for us in Shul. The Tochacha, Gemara tells us that we're supposed to read the Tochacha right before Rosh Hashanah as sort of a symbolic thing, Tichle Shana v'Tichle Klaloteha, that as the year comes to an end, so should all the bad tidings, the bad curses that happened this previous year should also come to an end. But the Tosho points out that we want to leave a little bit of space and we don't want to enter the new year on such a down note. So we read the Tochacha 2 Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, and we read Parshat Nitzavim, or if it's not a leap year, Nitzavim and Vayelech together, which are still way shorter than almost any other Parsha that we read, the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah. And so many say that one of the reasons we read Nitzavim, not only to create this break between the curses of the Tochacha and the new year, is for the passage that you have in source number 1. It's a little, we'll read the whole thing because it's quite powerful and it's quite relevant. V'haya ki avo alecha kol advarim ha'eleh, habracha v'haklala asher natati lefanecha, v'ashivota el levavecha b'chol hagoyim asher hidichacha Hashem Elokecha shama. If all these things that have just been described come to pass, the blessing and the curse, and you will hashivota el levavecha, you will take them to heart amidst all the nations where you have been dispersed. V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha v'shamata b'kolo. You will return to God and listen to his voice, according to everything that I am commanding you, you and your children, with all your heart and with all your soul. God will return your exiles and will have compassion on you and will gather you in from amongst all the nations where you have been dispersed. If Your dispersed ones are at the upper ends of reaches of heaven. From there, God will gather you in. He'll bring you to the land which your forefathers inherited. And you'll reconquer it, and it will be good for you, and it'll be even better than your ancestors had. God will, the literal translation is, will circumcise your heart and the heart of your children, to love God with all your heart and with all your soul, so that you will live. God will curse your enemies, and you will return and listen to the voice of God and do all of his commandments. God will provide for you, it will be abundant. Because you will listen to the voice of God to observe his commandments that are written in this Torah. Because you will return to God with all your heart and all your soul. This mitzvah, which I command you today, is not distant from you, and it is not too hidden from you. It's not in the heavens to say, who will go up to the heavens and take it for us and teach us so that we can do it. Neither is it across the sea to say that someone who will cross the sea and bring it to us. Because it is very close to you in your heart and in your mouth in order to do it.
Thank you.
What mitzvah is being described here?
Beautiful.
What mitzvah is being described? Right. Ki ha-mitzvah hazot, verse 11. Ki ha-mitzvah hazot asher anochi mitzaveh et mitzavcha hayom lo nifleiti mimcha v'lo rechokahi. This mitzvah, which I command you today, is neither wondrous from you nor is it distant from you. What mitzvah is that referring to?
Saying the Shema.
Saying the Shema. Why do you think it's saying the Shema?
Oh,
Because I heard a lot of words that you said in Hebrew, which sounded like they were from the Shema.
Okay, there is a lot of similar language. Good. You're okay, so there's a lot of similar language to the Shema. I'm not aware of anyone who thinks that the mitzvah is being described as the Shema.
Well, you said something about circumcise your heart.
Yeah.
Something about the covenant.
Okay.
I think the mitzvah is all mitzvot.
Okay. So we have the covenant, we have all mitzvot. Any other thoughts?
The expression ha mitzvah, I think Rav Hirsch also in other places says that refers to the whole Torah.
Okay, so those who say it refers to this whole Torah or the covenant are in good company, because that's what Rashi says. Source number 3. Ki karov elecha haTorah nitzna lachem bichtav u'ba'al peh. The Torah was given to you in written and oral form, but karov elecha, it is close to you, refers to the entire Torah. The Ramban thinks it refers, right, the language is ki ha mitzvah, this mitzvah. It has to be a specific mitzvah. So the Ramban, if we go up to source number 2, in the second line says, ha-mitzvah hazot al ha-tshuva haniskeret. This mitzvah refers to tshuva, which was mentioned earlier in the passage. That's why I read all 11 verses to you, where it says, v'hashevota el levavecha, you will return it to your heart. V'shavta ad Hashem elokecha, you will return to God. Mitzvah sheyitzaveh otanu lasot ken. It's a mitzvah that we are commanded to do teshuvah.
Wow.
Okay, so that's because of this opinion of the Ramban, and he's not alone. And it's called, based on this, Parshat HaTshuva. The section, the parsha, the section of tshuva. So that's the other main reason why many say we read specifically Parshat Nitzavim right before Rosh Hashanah, because it contains in it the mitzvah of what we're supposed to be doing on Rosh Hashanah. contains in it the mitzvah of tshuva. Okay, so that's point number one. I just want to mention, because it's so powerful, Rashi quotes it, and I think we spoke about it last year. The Gemara in Eruvin, which I didn't include on the sheet, I tried to whittle it down so we could save a little bit of the forests. But when it says Lo Bashamayim Hi, that it's not in heaven, so the Gemara says Lo Bashamayim Hi, She'ilu Haya Bashamayim, if it were in heaven, you would have to go up to heaven in order to get it. Lo Me'ever Layam Hi, it's not across the sea. If it were across the sea, you'd have to cross the sea in order to get Torah. Torah is so essential that even though we read this, right, as a great gift, that Torah is close and accessible to us, if it weren't so close and weren't so accessible, and maybe there's times in our lives when we feel that it's very distant, we have to nonetheless traverse those great distances in order to get Torah, because that is what we are commanded to do. Very powerful statement. We'll come back to at the end a little bit on how this might help us in preparing for Rosh Hashanah, but I wanted to, for the bulk of the shiur, look at the very famous articulation of, or application of this pasuk, really according to the approach of Rashi, the approach that says we're talking about the entire Torah. And that is the famous sugya in the Gemara in Bava Metzia of Tanor Shel Achnai.
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yes.
I'm sorry, just before we get into that.
Yeah.
I thought I saw somewhere on here that the language that is in the Torah here is about, and they will return, you will return to your heart.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like a prediction that it will happen, I think was the point that was made here. And I was just thinking, it's almost like a promise. You know?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's
it's so beautiful that way, you know.
yeah. So there are sources in the Talmud that talk about that. That we are destined or promised that we will ultimately do tshuva. Right. The Rambam says, we saw this in our Shabbos afternoon learning. The Rambam says, if you commit a transgression, then kishe ya'aseh teshuva. When you do tshuva, this is how you have to do tshuva. So some read it as tshuva is not a mitzvah, but it's something, it's a gift we're given, and there's a specific way to do it. Others read it as the Rambam is saying that we are promised, right? Ultimately, we will do tshuva, that there is something sort of innate or inherent about it, which is a very powerful way of thinking about tshuva.
Rabbi Kaplowitz?
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me. The phrase Lo Bashamayim Hi sort of triggered a memory of, I don't know where the saying comes from, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz meyirat shamayim.
Yeah.
In other words, this is your purview. Nobody commands, well, they can command it, but you're the only one who can do it. You're the only one responsible for it. And heaven is kind of puts a hands off on this.
Yeah.
This is human. This requires human intervention, not divine intervention.
Oh, beautiful. That's a beautiful insight. That certainly works if we're talking about tshuva. Thank you, Rena. Okay, so as I said, we'll come back to some of the tshuva applications of this at the end. But I wanted to spend some time with the the approach that says it's referring to the entire Torah, and the most famous application of this by far is the Gemara in Bava Metzia, which is talking about the Tanor Shel Achnai. It's a very technical conversation. The Gemara is talking about whether various vessels and utensils are subject to the laws of Tuma, whether they can become ritually impure. And they ask specifically about this Tanor Shel Achnai, which is a specific type of oven that was built out of the shards or the broken pieces of previously constructed ovens. Okay, they didn't have ovens like GE or whatever that are made out of whatever metals our ovens are made out of. Their ovens were clay ovens, brick ovens, and they would shatter from time to time. So if you were then to take those pieces of whatever was clay, plaster, and reassemble them in order to make another oven, is that reconstructed oven susceptible to tuma or not? It's machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. So the Gemara in Bava Metzia tells us about this debate. And the rabbis say it is Tameh, and the Rabbi Eliezer says it's Tahor. And then the Gemara tells us, so in the first line, in the Aramaic or the Hebrew, at the very last word, B'otzo hayom, Heshiv Rabbi Eliezer al kol tshuvot sheba'olam, v'lo kiblu himenu. On that same day when they were debating about the Tanor Shalachnai, this type of oven, Rabbi Eliezer also gave answers to all other halachic debates they were having. And they did not accept his answers. Amar lahem, he says to them, Im halacha kamoti charuv ze yochiach. So he says to them, if I'm correct, if the halacha is like me, then the carob tree will prove it. Ne'ekar charuv mimkomo mea ama. And the carob tree that he pointed to uprooted itself and walked 100 amot, moved 100 amot and replanted itself. You know, we don't have any plants or flowers like that in our shul garden yet, do we? Okay, maybe next year, right?
That's even better than the ring cycle example.
Yeah. Some say that the tree moved 400 cubits. Amrulo ein mevi'in ra'aya min hacharuf, but the rabbis all respond to him, we don't bring proof from a carob tree. Chazar v'amar lahem im halacha kamoti amat hamayim yochichu. He says if the halacha is like me, then these water canals or irrigation canals will prove it. Chazur amat hamayim acharehem. The water that was flowing through the canals switched directions. Amrulo ein mevi'in raya me'amat hamayim. They said we don't bring proof from the water. Chazar v'amar lahem im halacha kamoni. So he says, if the halacha is like me, then the walls of the Beit Midrash will prove it. Hatu kotlei Beit HaMidrash lipol, and the walls start to cave in. Ga'ar behem Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua gets very angry at the walls of the Beis Medrash. Amar lahem im talmidei chachamim enatzchim ze et ze b'halacha atem mativchem. Says the scholars are arguing over matters of halacha. This has nothing to do with you, walls of the Beis Medrash. Why are you involving yourselves? And so listen to this. Lo naflu mipnei kvodosh Rabbi Yoshua v'lo zakfu mipnei kvodosh Rabbi Eliezer. They did not fall down in order to show respect to Rabbi Yoshua, who told them to stop. They also didn't re-straighten themselves because they wanted to show respect to Rabbi Eliezer. Ve'adayin matin v'omdin. And they're still in this diagonal state. Right? As an aside, this very much reminds me of the halacha for Ashkenazim of how we put up a mezuzah.
Of course.
Right? Why do we put our mezuzahs up on an angle?
Because of this.
Not because of this exactly.
Hillel versus Shammai.
Hillel versus Shammai. One of them, Hillel says that it should be straight up, and Shammai says it should be on an angle. And so it should be horizontal. And in order to, as a compromise, we put it at an angle to show that we want to respect both opinions. Okay, back to our Gemara. So the walls of the Beis Medrash remain at an angle, or might remain at an incline to show respect for both of these great rabbis. Chazar v'amar lahem, im halacha kamoti min hashamayim yochichu. So he says one more time, if the halacha is like me, then it'll be proven from heaven. Yatzta bat kol ve'amra malachem etzel Rabbi Eliezer shalacha kamotu b'kol makom. So a heavenly voice comes out and says, why are you giving him trouble? The halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer in every instance. Amad Rabbi Yoshua araglav ve'amar lo Bashamayim Hi. Rabbi Yoshua stands up on his feet and he says, it is not in heavens. My lo Bashamayim Hi. What does it mean it's not in heavens? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah shekfar nitna Torah mehar Sinai ein anu mashkichin bivat kol shekfar katafta bahar Sinai b'Torah acharei rabim lehatot. So what's the significance of our verse, Lo Bashamayim Hi? It's not in heaven. Rabbi Yirmiyah says the significance is once the Torah was given at Har Sinai, we do not rule based on a heavenly voice, because the Torah already tells us how we should resolve disputes, and that is acharei rabim lahatot, we must follow after the majority. Okay, so at this point, Rabbi Eliezer loses. If you can call it what happened to him losing, but the halacha is not going to be ruled like him. Eshkecha Rabbi Natan leEliyahu. So as a follow-up to this story, we're told that Rabbi Natan saw Eliyahu Hanavi, saw Elijah the prophet. Amar le ma avid kushabrichu b'hayishata. And he asks him, what did God do at this moment when the rabbis were arguing? Amar le, so Eliyahu responds back to him, Kachiyech ve'amar nitzchuni banai, nitzchuni banai. Said God smiled and he said, my children have defeated me, my children have defeated me. It's a wild, wild story. Wild story. What does it mean, you think, at the end when he says, my children have defeated me?
They've taken their neshamas.
Say that again?
Yeah, they've taken their neshamas very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
They've also taken perhaps the notion of the two trumpets, which in Hasidus is interpreted as meaning we're half and half with Hashem, because there's a tzadi on one side and a tzadi on the other side, and a vav that comes down between them. So we've stood up for the way in which we perceive the truth of essence, which is beyond any contradiction, ultimately, of course, but we've come to do it. And so we have defeated the notion of a God in a sense that is still too close to what others think of as a human religion, and turned it upside down and embraced it as our responsibility.
Okay.
That's how I hear it.
Is God upset that he's been defeated, or is God happy that he's been defeated?
Oh, very happy.
Happy.
He's happy,
Yeah.
right? He smiles, right? It's kind of like the first time your kid beats you at checkers or chess or whatever, right?
Right.
It's and not when you're letting them win, but when they've actually figured out how to do it on their own, right? It's kind of that. There are those who say that this phrase nitzchuni banai should not be translated as they've defeated me or they've triumphed over me, but nitzchuni, like the word la netzach, eternal. My children have eternalized me. Because they've mastered the halachic system so greatly, it's a way of eternalizing God's word, which I think is a beautiful way of reading it. Okay, so we have this wild story, right? Clearly, based on the facts, it would seem that Rabbi Eliezer is correct, that we should follow him. And yet we intentionally are told, we're told that even though we know what the facts should be, that's not what the halachic practice should be. The halachic practice should be to follow the rabbis, even though we know now that they're wrong. So the Shita Mekubetzet brings a really interesting read on this story. Source number 5. Hakavana bazel lenasot et hachachamim im zeh hakol ya'atikim mima shemekubal biyadam. Says the point of this story is that it was a test of the rabbis. Will the rabbis stand committed to their insistence that they're correct after hearing a bat kol tell them that the halacha should be like Rabbi Eliezer? So it's sort of a test of how much do they really buy into the system, which is a pretty interesting way of looking at this. Right, the Ran also drives home this point, where he tells us in the second line, everyone saw that Rabbi Eliezer was closer to the truth. It doesn't say he was 1000% correct, but he was closer to the truth than them. And he brought signs that showed that he had the truth, that he was correct. And even the heavens ruled like him. And nonetheless, they ruled according to their majority consensus. Because once they reached a consensus that it was impure, even though they now know that that is the opposite of the truth, they did not want to reverse course and say that it was pure. And if they would reverse course, then that would be a violation of the Torah. Because the Torah tells us we have rules of psak, we have rules, and we have to follow the majority, even if we know that they're factually wrong. Okay, we have a number of sources that point this out, this radical conclusion. And then we come, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I think that this probably shows that God enjoys a good debate. It amuses him. And look who he picked for his people anyway.
That's for sure. That is for sure. But then we come to a really interesting set of sources, beginning with number 8. Gemara earlier on in Eruvin tells us, and this is also a fairly well-known one, I suspect that we've all seen this at one point or another. Amar Rabbi Abba Amar Shmuel, Shalosh Shanim Nechlaku Beit Shammai Beit Hillel. For 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel argued with each other. Halalu amim halacha kemotenu, v'halalu amim halacha kemotenu. Each one of them said the halacha should be like us. Yatsa bat kol ve'amra, elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim, v'halacha kebeit Hillel. So a bat kol, a heavenly voice, came and said, these and these are the words of the living God, and the halacha follows Beit Hillel. Well, once we've established, once we've been told that both of them are the words of the living God, why do we rule like Beit Hillel? And the answer, very famously, says because Beit Hillel was more deliberate in their argumentation, and they would consider both their words and the words of Beit Shammai. But not only did they consider the words of Beit Shammai, but they presented Beit Shammai's argument first. So because Beit Hillel was more meticulous and more meshlakite, that's why we rule like them. Any questions on this?
Sometimes I wonder whether Beit Hillel had a better pulse on what people would be willing to accept and to do. Is that
okay? That certainly seems to be the case from other stories with Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. The Beit Hillel or Hillel was the more empathetic of the two, and that could very well be.
Shammai was a Kohen, wasn't he?
It could very well be. I don't know.
Okay.
But how do we know that we follow Beit Hillel?
The sages say.
No. Yatsa bat kol v'amra elu ve'elu divrei Elohim chaim v'halacha kebeit Hillel.
Oh,
A bat kol, a heavenly voice told them.
Right.
What did we just see in the story of Tanur Shalachnai?
Don't listen to
Don't listen.
We don't listen to the bat kol.
Right.
Right. So, and then if we look on in source number 9, we have what's number 9? Hold on. Okay, we can skip number 9. Number 9 is an interesting question about did Beit Shammai ever actually do what they said should be done, right? Or did they always defer to Beit Hillel in the end? So that gets into question of, well, are we talking about before the Bat Kol emerged or after the Bat Kol emerged? But again, it seems to be based on this bat kol, on this heavenly voice. And then we get to source number 10. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis teach, Mishametu Nivim Hachronim, Chagai Zachariah Malachi, Nistalkaru Kodesh Misrael. Once the last of the prophets died, and those were Chagai, Zachariah, Malachi, the Ruach HaKodesh, the heavenly spirit, departed from the Jewish people. Afal Pichein Hayu Mishtamshin Bebat Kol. But nonetheless, they still had the benefit of hearing a bat kol. Pamachat Hayu Misubim Baliat Beit Guria B'Yericho. One time they were in the attic of Beit Guria in Jericho. And that's not lehem bat kol min hashamayim. And a heavenly voice came from heaven. Yesh kan achat shera'ui shetishre alav shechina. So there's one of you sages that is deserving to have the Shekhinah, the divine presence, rest upon them. Kim Moshe Rabbeinu, just like Moshe. Ela she'ein doro zakai lakach, but his generation is not deserving of it. Natnu chachamim et einayim behillel hazaken, right? So they figured out that the sage that was being referred to is Hillel Hazaken. But again, we seem to have a Gemara asserting that they were relying on a bat kol. One more. I'm going to go a little bit out of order to number 12, the Mishnah, talking about what types of testimony is accepted in courts. Me'idin la'or haner la'or halvana. Witnesses, if we're talking about, right, not a normal court case, but a case of a possible situation of aguna, of igun, of a woman remaining chained to her husband. So in that case, we are more lenient on which testimony we accept to establish if the husband is dead. So we accept testimony at night, and by candlelight, by moon. Umasi'in al pi batko. We allow these formerly married women to remarry based on a batko. Okay, again, we're relying on a bat kol to allow a woman who would otherwise be halachically married to her husband to dissolve that marriage and remarry. So we have a lot of sources that seem to run counter to the very strong principle and story that we saw at the beginning of our shir with Lo Bashamayim Hi. Anyone have any thoughts on how we might resolve this?
No.
Okay, so let's go back to number 11, the Tosfot. The Tosfot take a stab at it. So they asked the question we just asked. It's commenting on our story of Tanor Shalachnai. And they comment on the line, Lo Bashamayim Hi, it's not in heaven. V'hada Amar B'per Kama D'Yavamot, D'Alacha K'Beit Hillel Mishum D'Yatza Bat Kol. Right. So what about the Gemara we saw in Yevamos, which says that we rule like Beit Hillel because the bat kol tells us to do so? Shane hacha shebalach lok al divrei Torah. Dichtiv acharei rabim lehatot. Aval atem hatam adaraba. Beit Hillel ruba. So he says the reason why we can't rely on the bat kol in our story in Eruvin with the Tanor Shalachnai is because it's Rabbi Eliezer pitted against the rest of the sages. So that would be contradictory to the Torah's principle of Acharei Rabim Lahatot, that we have to follow the majority. But in the case of Beit Hillel versus Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel represents the majority opinion. So it wouldn't be a contradiction to the Torah to rely on the bat kol in that situation.
Yeah, that's not humble.
So Ilav Tahava Misfakalan, Iazlinam Bataruba Mishum de Beit Shammai Havu Charife Tuva. The reason why we might have thought to rule against Beit Hillel is because Beit Shammai is Charifi Tuva. They are more sharp. Okay, so Beit Hillel might have been more compassionate in their rulings, but Beit Shammai was seen as being, and we're told that Beit Hillel was more deliberate in their considerations. But Beit Shammai was seen as being more intellectually precise or more sharp. And so maybe we would that quality of Beit Shammai would overrule the majority of Beit Hillel. The Ode, Dekan lo yatsa bat kol ela mishum kvodo de Rabbi Eliezer shamar min hashamaim yochichu. Furthermore, in our story, the only reason the bat kol came and said, why are you bothering Rabbi Eliezer? Was to show respect for Rabbi Eliezer, because he said, he's the one who sort of invited the bat kol to intervene when he said, let it be proved from heaven that I'm correct. V'hada amar hata Rabbi Yeshua hida amar emashkichim bebat kol v'shaminan leila Rabbi Yeshua ella al above a comma. Okay, and furthermore, where it says Rabbi Yeshua says that we don't follow the Bakol, we only listen to Rabbi Yeshua for Bakol. The Haimasa Rabbi Eliezer the Hacha Hatam Diik Mita Ka'amar Lo Bashamayim Hi Kvar Nitna Lanu Tor Misinai Mashma to Beshum Makom Ein Mashkichin. Right, so he says that it's not it was specific to this case, right? That it's specific to this case that we don't rule like a Bakol. But the implication is in the story of Beit Hillel, Beit Shammai, that because it was not the Bakol intervened on its own, like God inserted God's self, or wherever the Bakol comes from, inserted itself. It is, it's more legally significant than if it was invited in by one of the participants in the debate. That's how Tosfot resolves the problem. Are we convinced?
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've dealt with the question. It's an interesting, it's a fascinating phenomenon. Do we listen to the Bakol? Do we not? Are there limits to rabbinic authority, right? What if the rabbis are so blatantly wrong? I think we dealt with this a couple of weeks ago. Right, but what if the rabbis are so is there a point where we could say they're so wrong, it's obvious that we shouldn't be following that majority opinion? Really interesting fundamental questions, foundational questions. Now I want to bring it back a little bit to how this idea of the bat kol and lo bashamayim might help us, as I said, because there is a significant opinion that says that it refers to not the entirety of Torah and the halachic system, but that it refers to tshuva. So to do that, I want to look at Pirkei Avot, source number 14. In the 6th chapter, which if you'll recall, the 6th chapter is not originally part of Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot was originally 5 chapters, and a 6th chapter was added because of the very widespread practice of learning Pirkei Avot each Shabbos of Sfirat HaOmer between Pesach and Shavuos. So in order to give us enough of Pirkei Avot to learn every Shabbos, a 6th chapter was added, and it's a chapter which talks about the way in which Torah is acquired. So it's very appropriate for preparations for Shavuos. In the context of that additional material that was added on to Pirkei Avot, we see the following. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, interesting, it's Rabbi Yeshua, the same Rabbi Yeshua who told us, Ein mashkichim bevat kol. We don't follow the bat kol. So here he tells us, B'chol yom vayom, bat kol yotzeit mehar chorev, umachrezet v'omeret, oy lehem labriot me elbona shel Torah. Every day, a bat kol emerges from Chorev, from Mount Sinai, and it decrees, woe to humanity, to humankind, for their contempt towards Torah. Shekol mi she'eno osek b'Torah nikra nazuf. Whoever doesn't study Torah is called a nazuf, a rebuked, a deplorable one. Shne'emar nezem zahav be'af chazir, isha yafa v'tzara ta'am, ve'omer v'aluchot masei elokim hema, v'amichtav michtav elohim hu charut al haluchot. Right, this is also a very famous end of this Mishnah. it says that the tablets, the luchot, were the handiwork of God, and the writing was the writing of God. Charut al haluchot, literally engraved on the tablets. Al tikra charut ela cherut. Don't read it as charut, engraved. Rather read it as cherut, free. She'ein lecha ben chorin ela misha osek b'talmud Torah. The only truly free person is one who studies Torah. Okay, but interestingly, the same Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, who tells us that we don't rule based on the bat kol, tells us that every day a bat kol comes from Har Sinai, and it says, woe to those who don't study Torah. What is this bat kol that he's talking about? Any thoughts, any ideas? So there are many who want to connect it to the original revelation. And there we read in the Torah's description, Et hadvarim ha'ela diber Hashem el kol kehalchem bahar mitoch ha'esh ha'anan v'arafel kol gadol ve'lo yosaf. So these are the words that God spoke to the entire congregation at the mountain from within the fire and the cloud. Kol gadol ve'lo yasaf, a great voice that did not yasaf, did not end, did not. I'm not sure exactly. We'll see. There's a big debate over how to translate ve'lo yasaf. He wrote them on the two tablets and he gave them to me. Rashi lo yasaf tells us mitargaminan ve'lo pasik. It did not stop. Ulefisha midat basar vadam einan yacholim ledaber kol divrei benishima achat midat hakadosh baruch hu eino kain lo haya posek. Right? When humans speak, it's impossible for us to say everything we want to in one breath. Some people try, but no one's ever successful. But God is not like that, right? God in one breath was able, right, didn't have to interrupt the words that were said to take a breath. We should lo haya posek, lo haya mosif, right? He didn't stop, he didn't have to add anything. Kol chazak v'kayam le'olam, because God's voice is strong and is everlasting. Or alternatively, Rashi tells us, lo yasaf, lo hosif leheraot be'oto pumbi. He did not again reveal himself in this public way. Right, so it was a kol gadol v'lo yasaf. It was a unique giving of God's voice, a unique articulation of God's voice. The Targum Onkelos, it's Targum Onkelos is a translation of the Torah into Aramaic, and translating it into English is even more complicated. So he says, Yat pat gima ha'ilin malil Hashem im kol kaholchon. These words Hashem said to the entire congregation, Bitura migo eshta anana va'amitita kal rav velo pasak. He says it was God said these words to the entire assembly at the mountain from within the fire, the cloud and the thick cloud, a great voice without cessation. It was written on the two tablets and given to me. Lo pasak, it did not stop, meaning whatever voice God used on Shavuos, the original giving of the Torah, that voice is still emanating from Har Sinai. That very same voice of the Torah is still emanating. Okay, it's still there. Rabbi Lamb says beautifully, this is a summary that I found online, so I didn't have to retype the entire thing. Since that first Shavuos, the divine voice still broadcasts on the same heavenly wavelength from Sinai every day. It's like before cable TV or before getting our TV over the internet, right? It's like tuning in to get the TV waves or the radio waves with the antenna. The waves are there. We just have to get the right antenna in order to tune into it and get the reception. So why do we not hear it? Why are we not moved to teshuvah, introspection every day? The answer is simple. we expend tremendous effort to make sure there is never a moment of silence, a moment to think and to listen. So part of the introspection of that we need in order to do an effective tshuva is to be able to be focused, centered, and silent enough to hear that voice of God that's being broadcast. And maybe we could say, right, to kind of bring these two ideas together, that there is a bat kol, there is a heavenly voice emanating from Sinai. Maybe that heavenly voice is more of the Mesorah, is more of the tradition and the rules and the principles and the values that were given to us at Har Sinai, by which we can continue to live and experience the Torah and God's words. Ein mashgichim bebat kol, because that original voice is still resonating, is still out there, in whatever form it takes, right? I don't know how literal we have to take it, but whatever form it takes, because its reverberations are still there, therefore, ein mashgichim bebat kol, we don't listen to a new bat kol, right? Rabbi Yeshua says, this bat kol that was given at Har Sinai is of significance. We do listen, we should listen to that bat kol, we should listen to its message. And because that one is still accessible to us, if we are able to tune into it, ein mashgichim bebat kol, we should read as ein mashgichim bebat kol acheret, or bebat kol chadasha. We don't listen to a new bat kol, we don't listen to a new heavenly voice, because that original heavenly voice is still there and ready for us. And so if we think of it in that way, you can accept my conclusion or not. But certainly I think that's something to think about as we're very much focused not only on cleaning and cooking and all the other stuff we have to do between now and Sunday evening when Rosh Hashanah begins, but hopefully also making time to be introspective and to be engaged in a process of tshuva with ourselves, with our friends, family, community, and with Hashem. The role of that bat kol, of tapping into that original heavenly voice, hopefully is one that we're able to do, and that we have a successful Rosh Hashanah together. So as I said, I'll take any questions or comments, but we're not going to meet again, I don't think, until after all the Chagim. The way the schedule falls, it's not going to be feasible. So we'll take a little hiatus from our weekly shir. There will be a something over Sukkot. Wednesday evening of Chol HaMoed Sukkos will be sushi and some sort of Torah learning in the sukkah at the shul. Details to follow on that. And wish everyone, we're only on Tuesday, but wish everyone a good Shabbos, a Shana Tova, and I'll see you all soon.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Rabbi? I
Yes.
think that this actually is a way of showing that Hashem has no human attributes. In other words, when he speaks, it's the whole thing.
Right.
In one instant. I think that's all very, very strong. By the way, did you ever, I know that from the so-called Big Bang, which is studied very, very much, but there was a voice from that has been discovered, I think, in the 70s.
Really?
It's a temperature, which is not absolute zero. It's like 4 degrees. And it's absolutely everywhere that we can see. It's the same everywhere.
Wow.
So it's like Hashem's bat kol.
Huh. Fascinating. Fascinating.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, have a good night, everybody. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Tov.
Good night.
Good night.
Shana
Bye,
Tova.
Tov.